are on the northeast coast of a Caribbean island nation with my #1 scuba diver. What's your name? ¿Cómo se llama?
Jessiel.
¿Cómo?
Jessiel.
Jessiel. ¿Tu buzo? ¿Tu buzo? Buzo.
Buzo.
Sí, tú. ¿Tu pescador?
Yo soy Gonzalo.
¿Tú eres un pescador? No.
Yo me llamo Jessiel Gonzalo.
Okay. Well, he's ready to go, it sounds like. So, hopefully we're going to go out and find some treasure today.
Ya te tiro la mano.
What? Habla.
Mi mamá es cristiano.
¿Tu mamá qué?
Cristiano.
Haitiano. ¿Tu mami? ¿Y tú?
No, yo soy
¿Tu mami haitiano?
de hebreo, yo soy.
Alright, there you have it. We are ready to go. We're going to go search for 300-year-old treasure today. Hopefully we'll do good. Dame esto.
Una caña de pescar.
¿Qué?
Una caña de pescar.
Cana pescado. ¿Tú sabes eso?
Ya sé.
Here's I have my researcher and shipwreck historian and his sister here today. Hey, habla algo? Hey, ¿cómo? Hey,
Mi papá
¿tu papá qué?
es del monte.
Es de monte.
Y papá es monte.
O en el bote.
El monte.
En el bote, monte de bote.
Mi mamá vive en la palacia. Y
Ah, tu mamá en el palacio.
Sí,
Hoy.
sí, hoy.
Okay. So where's the shipwreck we're gonna dive today?
Sí, hoy.
What shipwreck are we gonna dive today?
Sí.
See? And you?
Mi papá
What's the name of the shipwreck that we're gonna dive? El nombre.
La mar.
In el mar. Okay. This is your favorite? William Lawson. That almost says William Rawson. You drink that last night?
Por aquí.
Entro. Pues eso es porque tú necesitas, mira esto. Abajo. Ahora. Otra vez. Más fuerte. Más fuerte. Ay, sí. ¿Cómo? Está bueno. Era punto ahí. Espérate, mira. Okay. And today, tell me, what are we going to be doing? Are we going to work the bow or are we going to work the stern of the ship? And how are we going to tell up for the nationalities, Spanish, English, or French? Okay, but you don't know. ¿Tú no sabes? No. ¿Cómo? ¿Él no sabe eso? No. ¿Y tú? ¿Y qué más? Porque este bote es muy sucio. So, if we're gonna excavate the front of the ship. ¿Tú sucio? ¿Tú? No. ¿Tú? No, tú no sucio.
Oye, sucia.
Ay Dios, ahora mi pantalón sucio.
¿Eh?
Eh?
¿Qué?
Okay.
¿Qué?
Okay, so what ship are we going to work on today?
Ship was an Urca which would have carried approximately 400 to 500 people on board. The ship was owned by Bartolomé and Juan de Aponte, both natives of the Canary Islands. The captain was Juan de Salas, who died in Santiago after the wreck from his injuries. The ship was inbound from the islands of the Canaries to Havana, Cuba. Now she rests on the sea floor on north shore of Hispaniola. The Urca wrecked on the reefs off the beach at Boba in front of the house and hunting grounds of Captain Francisco de Ortega Franco, who was an important local on the north coast of the island. He and his men turned up to help the crew and presumably take off with the valuables saved from the ship or anything which washed into the beach. Ortega sent his men into the nearby hills to look for any lost people and came across two young women. He put them up in his home and found husbands for them. He advised the local officials of the wreck to take note and report on whether the ship had actually wrecked or in fact had only run aground. Ortega paid for the provisions for the survivors and the trip to the French town of Guarico. He paid Pedro Guerrillon for 5 horses for the trip, as his own horses were occupied in saving people from the Urca. When the French turned up on the shore to loot whatever they could find, he sent men to arrest them. He looked after Master Salas in his home until he died. The Apontes were so grateful for the help that they gave Ortega 14 paintings in different sizes of the Virgin Mary. Statements were taken at Santiago de los Caballeros in February 1718. These were taken in defense of Ortega, who was accused of having taken advantage of the situation. Of these 12 questions asked, only the following are relevant. Number 2. While following its course, the Urca went on to the reef at night off the coast of my hunting grounds at Boba. The ship wrecked and the men made it to the shore. In the boat, the men were disoriented and wandered into the hills where they were starving to death. Number 3. On the 3rd day after the wreck, I arrived on the scene with some of my men from the other side of the river Bazua. I saw someone on the other side of the river. He swam over to meet me at my request and told me all that had happened regarding the said ship. His name was Baltasar de Estrada. I crossed the river with my men and met the Aponte gentlemen. I could see they were all in great need and gave the order to my servants and hunters to provide food for these poor people who otherwise would have died of hunger. Number 6. The Aponte gentlemen attempted to make a legal donation of all that was scattered along the beach and washed in by the sea. I could not permit this. At the same time, people arrived on the scene from the 3 places of Santiago, Vega, and Cochuet. They carried off whatever they found. As well, some other came from the French colonies. They even made off with some of the iron. Number 11. The Apontes accuses Ortega of having made use of the great amount of money which was washed in by the sea. Of great interest here is that the official who took the statements by witnesses was none other than Ortega's own son-in-law. Most of the witnesses had known Ortega personally for the past 15 years or so years. They were locals and illiterate and unable to sign their testimonies. It is clear that Ortega benefited from this wreck as it was off his land, and he obviously bribed the officials who turned up to inspect. What washed up on the beach appears to have been taken off by the locals from Santiago, Cochuet, and Vega, as well as Frenchmen from neighboring provinces. Men who testified at Santiago de los Caballeros were Domingo de Velasco Alvarez, a notary public of the Town Council of Santiago; Juan González de Santiago, a resident of Santiago; Baltasar de Estrada, a resident of Santiago, had traveled the area; Pedro Grulin, a resident of Santiago; Francisco Eugenio, a resident of Santiago; Pedro Alvarez, a resident of Santiago; Diego Hernandez, a passenger on the Urca, and a resident of Santiago and also a native of the Canaries. Domingo de Velasco, notary public of the town council, age 28, said the Urca wrecked along the north coast at Boba next to the ranch of the said captain, Francisco de Ortega. The officials thought they were off Puerto Rico and decided to go into port there, possibly for water and food. Having seen land, we thought it was Puerto Rico and approached land. Between 9 and 11 p.m. that night, we struck a covered sandbank and the ship opened up and the stern pulled away. The men rushed to cut down the ship's masts to save the ship. It went on to its side, and immediately they lowered the boat down into the water. The captain and 4 sailors went into the shore and returned the next morning. The next 2 days were spent going back and forth with the small boat to bring the 560 people from the ship to the shore. Note, there is no mention of offloading any cargo. Another 3 days they spent on the beach recovering and to gain the strength to carry on overland. By then they had looked at the maps more carefully and realized they were on the island of Santo Domingo. They walked north in search of the Port Francis, which they decided was the closest town. Some of the crew stayed with the boat to follow the men by water and help them cross the rivers. The men returned exhausted and remained on the beach for another 3 or 4 days. Ortega had not made an appearance yet. They decided to set fire to the ship. It broke in half and the cargo began to come in with the waves. It was at this point that Ortega arrived on the scene. He provided supplies for the men on the beach for the next 20 days. Some people from La Vega and Cochuet arrived along with the local authorities. The local residents made off with whatever washed up on the beach. Ortega took 2 young girls back to his house and left them in the care of his wife. He later arranged their marriages with locals. He also looked after Master Juan de Salas until he died. Juan González de Santiago, resident of Santiago, age 64. This man had known Ortega for 15 years, said. The ship wrecked off the coast of Ortega's land and the men from the Urca would surely have died in this remote place had it not have been for Ortega. When the local authority arrived at the scene, there were only a few others there at the location was really wild. When the residents of La Vega and Cochuet arrived, they took whatever they could. The Apontes gave 2 religious paintings to Ortega in thanks for his generosity. Baltasar de Estrada, resident of Santiago, had sailed on the Urca as a passenger, age 32, said the ship sank and it was impossible to avoid the tragedy. The men came onto the land without the slightest idea of where they were for the first 3 or 4 days. A group set out to explore and met 2 of Ortega's men. If Ortega had not come to the rescue, more than 500 people would have perished. The officials accompanied the men to homes in the nearby area and the Apontes and the 2 young girls stayed with Ortega. There was looting of cargo which washed up on the shore, and rumor has it that some Frenchmen turned up to see what could be taken. Pedro Grulin, resident of Santiago, age 40, said the ship's name was the Jesus Nazareno. Francisco Eugenio, resident of Santiago, age 47, was part of the delegation which went with the local authority to the site. He said they arrived at the beach to find the people from the said ship. He heard that Frenchmen had come to the beach to take whatever they found washed up on shore. Pedro Alvarez, resident of Santiago, GE 28, said the ship wrecked at night along the coast of Boba. When they realized what was happening, the ship was caught in the sand between 2 reefs. The masts were cut down and the ship settled into one of the reefs. The people went to shore on boats but did not know where they were. They were worn out and starving. The lost ones were found by dogs and musket shots. He heard that the officials who came to inspect sent men from La Vega to stop and arrest the French who had come to the scene and take whatever washed up on the shore. Diego Hernandez, just a child 11 or 12 years old and a resident of Santiago, he had sailed on the Urca as a cabin boy. Originally from the Canary Islands, said the ship wrecked at night along the coast of La Boba and the men made it to shore without knowing where they were. The survivors were starving and exhausted. If the said captain and his men had not helped out, everyone would have died most miserably. Having